Today, Lebanon is facing a very severe economic crisis. Banks in Lebanon have tightened cash withdrawals and most of the citizens are in dire situation. The price of goods has soared, the price of medicine has increased consistently, and inability to buy food because there's no more money. Some people had to pawn jewelry to buy food to continue living. The situation became critical when all banks blocked the cash withdrawal process, even if the money wanted to be withdrawn from a personal account. The restrictions that have been enforced since 2019 have angered the people, leading to demonstrations and increase in crimes. The ongoing protests have put pressure on the government administration, forcing Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri to resign on October 29, 2019. The economic turmoil in Lebanon does not seem to show any signs of recovery. But what caused the economic collapse in Lebanon? Why is it so difficult for Lebanon to rise again despite various economic recovery programs? In this video, we will see how a country with a population of 6 million can experience very severe economic problems. Keep watching. Great destruction from the Civil War. Bearing the title of Switzerland of the Middle East, Lebanon was once a country with a very strong economic structure. However, the civil war that broke out around 1975 to 1990 changed everything. It all started on April 13, 1975, when the Khattab Party attacked a bus carrying Palestinians to a refugee camp in Tal al-Zayder, Lebanon. The attack sparked a series of violence involving the Khattab Party and the Lebanese National Movement, LNM, which is allied with Lebanese leftist and pro-Muslim groups. Since then, a series of battles, killings, and violence erupted across Lebanon. In August 1982, Bashir Gemayel, the young leader of the Khattab Party, was elected to be the 7th president of Lebanon. However, 3 weeks after being appointed, the Khattab Party headquarters was bombed, and he was killed in the incident. The tragedy of Bashir's killing led to a counterattack by the Christian army. It is estimated that hundreds to thousands of refugees living in refugee camps in Sabra and Shatila have been killed. Although there was an effort to ease the tension by appointing Bashir Gemayel's brother, Amine Gemayel, to the presidency in late September 1982, it still failed. More deaths were recorded because of the fighting that took place between the Christians and the Muslims. Due to the civil war that lasted for over 15 years, Lebanon had witnessed terrible destruction of infrastructure. Schools, government buildings, roads, and public facilities have been severely damaged by the war. It is estimated that more than 100,000 people had died, and more than 1 million people had been displaced by the war. The influence of the Arab Spring. 2011 was the year of awakening of the people in most Arab countries due to the Arab Spring wave. The wave began from an incident of attempted suicide which happened on December 17, 2010, in Tunisia. Mohamed Bouazizi, a 26-year-old fruit and vegetable seller, set himself on fire out of frustration with the government in his country. As a result of the incident, 90% of Mohamed Bouazizi's body was burnt, and he later died on January 4, 2011. Following the death of Mohamed Bouazizi, there were massive protests until Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, the president of Tunisia who had been in power since November 7, 1987, had to resign. After the fall of the government of Zine El Abidine, the spirit of the Arab community to demand more changes in the administration had raged. The protests that started in Tunisia have spread to other Arab countries, including Lebanon. As a result of great pressure from the community, Saad Hariri, who was then Prime Minister of Lebanon, had to resign on June 13, 2011, and was subsequently replaced by Najib Mikati. Since that event, the political situation in Lebanon has been unstable, and during the period from 2011 to 2022, the position of the Prime Minister had changed 5 times. Serious financial issues. After the end of the Civil War in 1990, Lebanon tried to balance the economy with tourism activities, foreign aid, income from the financial industry, and most of the aid from the Arab Gulf countries. One of Lebanon's most consistent sources of finance is remittances from millions of its citizens working abroad. Despite the global financial crisis around 2008, Lebanese people who were working abroad would still send money home. However, remittances started to slow down in 2011 when there were conflicts between religious groups in the country. The upheaval in most of the Middle Eastern countries, including Lebanon's neighboring country, Syria, began to complicate the situation. As a result of the lack of inflow of money into the country's finances began to experience a deficit, and the debt was at an alarmingly high level. The country's income began to fail to compensate for the high rate of expenditure, as most things needed in Lebanon had to be imported, from staple foods to luxury cars. This situation lasted until 2016, after which banks started offering extraordinary interest rates for new depositors of American dollars and Lebanese pounds. This offer was to reinvigorate financial activities and efforts to restore the national economy. In the same year, the Banque du Liban, Lebanon's central bank, introduced financial engineering, a variety of mechanisms that offer banks lavish returns for new dollar deposits. This financial recovery program is led by Riyad Salameh, a former Merrill Lynch banker. Although, initially this step seemed interesting, it did not happen as expected. An increase in the value of the dollar caused an increase in the value of foreign reserves. Banks experience an increase in liquidity and debt exceeds total assets, indicating that the financial system is experiencing significant losses. This situation caused the Lebanese government to allocate a third of the country's expenditure just to manage the debt. What caused the economic collapse? As many parties began to limit spending, the Lebanese government did exactly the opposite of spending big by increasing the amount paid to civil servants. According to the data, salaries, remuneration and related payments of civil servants reached $2.1 billion in the first half of 2018, an increase of 26.2% from $1.6 billion in the same period in 2017. The year 2018 was also a very burdensome year for Lebanon when the elections that were held failed to form a stable government. The political instability had caused billions in aid funds from foreign countries to be withdrawn. This complicated the situation, as Lebanon has been so dependent on foreign aid for many years. The peak of unrest in the country erupted in October 2019, when the government led by Saad Hariri intended to impose a tax on the WhatsApp application. A tax will be levied on users who make calls from the WhatsApp application, and this had sparked the anger of most of the people. Massive protests were then held across the country to protest the proposal. Local banks closed their operations for 2 weeks for security purposes, as they were targeted by the protesters. As a result of increasing pressure coupled with the tension in the country, Saad Hariri announced his resignation as Prime Minister of Lebanon on October 29, 2019. After announcing his resignation, he served as interim Prime Minister until January 21, 2020, after which Hassan Diab took over the position. Explosion in Beirut. Whilst most of the people of Lebanon were struggling with economic and political instability, they were shocked by a tragedy that had a huge impact on the country. A terrible explosion occurred on August 4, 2020, in the port of Beirut, destroying a large part of Beirut and the surrounding area. The administrative center and main economic focus of the country, located in Beirut, had changed like a battlefield overnight. It all originated from a ship with a load of 2,750 metric tons of ammonium nitrate, which had experienced technical problems and had to dock in the waters of Beirut in 2013. It is understood that the ship is owned by a Russian businessman and is on its way from Georgia to Mozambique. The ship was later seized by the Lebanese authorities for failing to pay port taxes. Finally, in 2014, the cargo from the ship was unloaded and stored in a warehouse located in the port of Beirut. The spoils, which consisted of ammonium nitrate, are so dangerous if stored in unsafe conditions because it is a type of material that is used to produce fertilizers and explosives. Although the Lebanese government was warned many times about the dangers that will occur, no follow-up action was taken. Eventually, the loot stored in the warehouse exploded, destroying a large part of Beirut. An estimate of 218 people had died, 7,000 were injured, and 300,000 people were left homeless. 70,000 housing units were also reported damaged, and the value of the loss due to the explosion was estimated at $3.8 to $4.6 billion. Significant decline of Lebanon's GDP. Affected by the economic and political instability, the widespread of COVID-19 pandemic and the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon's economic activity declined significantly. In 2018, Lebanon's gross domestic product, GDP, was recorded at $55 billion US. However, its value plummeted to $20.5 billion US in 2021, and the country's per capita GDP value declined by 37.1%. The decline in economic activity has made it difficult for Lebanese people to obtain supplies of food and medicine. They had to queue for hours just to buy a bag of bread. The price of subsidized food increases every day, and the situation is getting more complicated as shops ration sales. Power outages are also reported to be becoming more frequent until they become so common due to fuel shortages. With the state of economic activity at a very critical level, Lebanon's Deputy Prime Minister, Saad al-Sami, decided to announce that the local banks and the country of Lebanon itself have gone bankrupt. He announced it himself on April 4, 2022, considering the state of financial institutions, which are no longer able to provide enough money for the country. In conclusion, Lebanon needs a consistent recovery action to restore the country's economic situation. The suffering of the people and the difficulty in getting food needs to be resolved as soon as possible to avoid more problems in the future. The leaders who are appointed to govern the country need to carry out their responsibilities by trying to find a way out of the crisis.